including Marxism, Darwinism, individualism, liberalism, and Freudian psychology. All right, so we will talk a lot about Jews today, but just as a caveat, it's important for us to remember that it's easy to see a Jewish conspiracy everywhere. But things are actually much more complicated than that. The argument I want to make to you today is that the Jews are a construct and tool of empire. In other words, they're really the middle managers. They're the ones who help manage the empire. And if the Jews weren't around, then it would be the Indians or some other group. An empire needs scapegoats. It needs middle managers. And for the past 200 years, the Jews have served the purpose. Something else I will show you today is that the empire, which is transnational capital, they get all the profit. They hide behind the scenes. They're the shadows. And they make all the money. And it's really the Jews get all the blame. And what we'll discuss next class is that this is the same thing that will happen today. Okay? So that's the argument I will make to you today. All right, so let's discuss the British Empire. The British Empire is unique in human history in that it controls the entire world. And it's just a small island, right? It's a small island with very little resources. And it's able to control the entire world because it controls global trade. It has the world's greatest navy. It also has the Bank of England, which is really transnational capital. And English becomes the lingua franca of the world and has colonies throughout the world as well. So for the British Empire, the way they control the world, it's a very simple concept. As long as the British Empire is able to control the seaways, then it controls the world. The great crisis, the great problem, great threat is that an empire will emerge within the Eurasian continent. It's called the heartland, okay? And this could be Germany, it could be Russia, it could be China. But if it's able to emerge, eventually, like the Mongol Empire, it's able to conquer the entire Eurasian continent, and through railways, it's able to link up Africa, the Middle East, Europe, and Asia all together into one trading bloc. And then you don't need the seaways anymore. If that were to happen, then the British Empire would go bankrupt. Because remember, the British Empire, with the Bank of England, transnational capital, it's really a Ponzi scheme. It needs people to keep on buying into the empire for it to continue to succeed. So the greatest threat is a great power emerging in the heartland. And throughout history, that was either the French, the Ottoman Empire, the Germans, or the Russians. So the grand strategy of the British is to create as much chaos and conflict in Europe as much as possible. You always want your enemies fighting each other, okay? And that's just the core strategy of the British. Not very hard, okay? So again, as we discussed, there are four major enemies that the British have faced throughout their history as an empire. The French, they're able to defeat because of the French Revolution, as well as the Napoleonic Wars. Then they had to face the Russians, and the Russians were the greatest threat because the Russians had the largest land empire, and they were the most likely to unify the Eurasian continent. They also faced the Ottomans, and they also faced the Germans. Now, the British could not seem as though they were interfering in European politics, because all that would do is anger the Europeans and unite the Europeans against the British. They had to do it using subterfuge, secretly, using intelligence operatives, right? And so, of course, what happened was that they developed different strategies in order to divide and conquer Europe. What they would do is promote revolutionary movements using transnational capital. And we'll discuss these revolutionary movements later on. They also industrialized Japan because they saw Japan as a natural ally in the world. Okay, so you know that in Japan, they underwent the Meiji Restoration, and in only a few decades, they were able to industrialize, so much so that they defeated Russia in the Russo-Japanese War in 1905. And you may not know this, but transnational capital, the British and the Americans, financed a great deal of Japan's industrialization because the Anglo-American Empire wanted Japan as an ally. Okay? It was a natural ally. What they would also do is establish resource colonies. So Australia, New Zealand, Canada, South Africa, these are all resource colonies. And the idea is that you can now use manpower to fund your armies, okay? And the last strategy is to, wherever you can, steal as much resources as possible as fast as you can. And this was true in India and China and Africa as well. Okay, so this is the grand strategy of the British. And they needed agents to help them in these endeavors, and the 17 Frankists made the most sense, right? So the advantages that 17 Frankists brought to the British Empire were fourfold. The first is that they already had a diaspora, right? And they were also crypto Jews. They also disguised their identity as Jews as well. So they were able, as a network, to conduct intelligence, do blackmail, and subvert governments, okay? They also had access to a lot of transnational capital. They themselves were extremely wealthy. Now, last major advantage, and the most important, is that they had revolutionary cells and networks. Okay, so remember, the 17 Frankists, they believed that they were saving the world. They believed they had to destroy the world in order to save it. And these made perfect revolutionaries. And I'll show you this as we move on. Okay? Now, the last reason that we won't discuss much today, but we'll focus a lot on in our last class, is the idea of eschatology, where the British Empire, they are Christians, and they believe that they must use Jews as a pawn in order to force the return of Jesus. This is something that we'll discuss a great deal next class, but I want to focus on these three reasons first, okay? All right. And it made sense for the British to align themselves with the 17 Frankists because the way they saw the world was the same. Okay? As an empire, as transnational capital, remember, you're focused on extracting as much energy as possible from your workers. So you're very materialistic. Well, the Frankists were also very materialistic as well, right? They believed that the body was more important than the spirit. Second is that both the Frankists and the British, they wanted to obtain power through chaos, instability, and regime change. And both were very focused on the pursuit of wealth and power. So these were natural allies. Sorry. All right, so let's use an example of how the Ottoman Empire, let's use an example of how the British Empire worked the 17 Frankists. And the most obvious example is the Ottoman Empire. So for the longest time, the Ottoman Empire was the most powerful force in Eurasia. And this was the Ottoman Empire at its height in 1683. Remember, in 1666 is when Zevi declared himself the Messiah. And remember that Zevi had to convert to Islam, and the people who followed him into Islam are called the Dome. Okay? The Dome are very important people. But over time, empires will decay. In 1853, Russia attacked the Ottoman Empire, and this led to the Crimean War. The British and the French feared Russian expansionism, and so they supported the Ottomans. And the Ottomans were able to defend themselves against the Russians. But this alliance came at a cost to the Ottomans. The British and the French made the Ottomans take out loans in order to finance the war. And over time, because of interest, these loans started to overwhelm the Ottoman financial system. And so what happened was the British and the French bankers came and established their own tax administration. And so from now on, a third of all revenue, tax revenue, that the Ottoman Empire generated would go directly to the French and British bankers. Okay? And so this caused the Ottoman Empire to decline rapidly over